I pulled into the driveway, the engine humming low as I killed the lights. It was past midnight, the end of another brutal 14-hour shift chasing down criminals. But tonight felt different. My body ached, not just from the weight of the vest, but from the bone-deep exhaustion of years on the force. I'd seen things, ugly things, that stuck with me. But this was a different kind of ugly. I stepped out of the car, the crisp night air barely registering as I walked up to the front door. Something felt off. Call it instinct, police intuition, maybe, but my gut was twisted in knots. The house was dark, too dark for this time of night. Kate always left the porch light on for me, a small beacon welcoming me home after a long shift. But tonight? Darkness. I unlocked the door quietly, hoping she was just asleep. Maybe she had a rough day and forgot. My hand hovered over my gun, a habit more than anything. As I pushed the door open, the silence hit me like a wall. Normally, I'd hear the soft hum of the TV or the clatter of her cleaning up after dinner. But now, just quiet. I dropped my keys on the table and took a breath, trying to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. Heading upstairs, my footsteps were slow, deliberate. That's when I heard it, voices. Muffled, intimate voices. I stopped halfway up, my heart thudding in my chest. Kate's voice and a man's. Laughter followed. Her laughter. The sound I hadn't heard from her in months, not the genuine kind. Not since things had gotten strained between us. But this was different, warm, playful, the way she used to laugh with me. My hands were shaking as I reached the top step. The bedroom door was ajar, and through the sliver of light, I saw it. Her silhouette, lying in bed, her body curled next to a man I didn't recognize. His arm draped over her, and she was smiling, her head resting against him like it was the most natural thing in the world. It felt like someone had punched me in the gut. My vision blurred, the edges of the room dimming as the reality sunk in. This wasn't just a bad dream. Kate was in our bed, my bed, with another man. The plane tickets in my pocket, the surprise anniversary trip I had planned, felt like a cruel joke. I was out there every night, catching criminals, protecting people, while she was here with him. I couldn't move, couldn't think straight. The betrayal was like a knife twisting in my chest, and all I could do was stand there, frozen. I should have kicked the door open, stormed in, demanded answers. I should have dragged him out of that bed and made him pay for what he'd done. But I didn't. Instead, I turned and walked back down the stairs, as quietly as I could, my heart pounding in my ears. I collapsed at the kitchen table, staring at the tickets in front of me, my hands trembling. The laughter upstairs still echoed in my head, mocking me, reminding me of how blind I had been. Every late shift, every missed dinner, every time I told her I was doing this for us. It had all been for nothing. And now? Now I had nothing left. But then a thought crossed my mind, dark and satisfying. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I'd spent my entire career catching people who thought they could get away with anything. Kate thought she could betray me and walk away unscathed. She had no idea who she was dealing with. I wasn't going to explode, wasn't going to make a scene. No, I'd learned to be patient, to gather evidence, to wait for the right moment to strike. Revenge wasn't about immediate satisfaction. It was about making sure she felt the same gut-wrenching betrayal I did, but tenfold. I pulled out my phone, logged into the home surveillance system I had installed months ago, mostly for security, or so I thought. Little did she know, I had cameras in places she'd never expect. Bedroom, living room, even her car. I smirked as I watched the footage. Everything was there, in vivid detail. Them, in my bed, laughing, touching. It was all I needed. Tomorrow, I'd file for divorce. But that wouldn't be enough. I wanted her to lose everything, and I knew just how to do it. She didn't know I had been saving money for years in a separate account, preparing for the day I'd retire. She wouldn't get a penny. And as for her new lover, I'd make sure he knew exactly who I was. I'd find out everything about him, his job, his family, his weaknesses. I was a cop. Gathering intel was my specialty. Kate thought she had one, but she had no idea what was coming. Revenge was going to be sweet. I took a long, shaky breath, sitting at the kitchen table in the dark, with only the soft hum of the refrigerator to keep me company. My mind raced, every scenario playing out in vivid detail, but none of them were satisfying enough. Storming upstairs, throwing him out the window, breaking something valuable. None of that would fix what she'd done. None of that would make me feel better. No, that kind of reaction would be what she expected, something raw and impulsive. I had to be smarter than that. Cooler. Calculated. I'd been a cop long enough to know that people always slip up when they're emotional. It's in the heat of the moment when you make the mistakes that cost you. And I wasn't going to make any mistakes. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. Not ever. I poured myself a glass of water, the cold liquid running down my throat, hoping it would cool the fire burning inside me. I needed to think, to plan. This wasn't just about Kate. No, it was about something bigger than that, betrayal. I was out there every night putting my life on the line, while she was here, making a mockery of everything we'd built together. The vows we made, the life we'd planned. It was all a lie now. And the worst part? She probably didn't even feel guilty. She probably thought she could get away with it, that I'd never notice, that I'd be too wrapped up in my work to see the truth. But I'd seen it. And now I was going to make sure she regretted every second of it. I stood up, the legs of the chair scraping softly against the kitchen floor. I left the tickets to the Bahamas on the table. She'd find them eventually, probably when she was looking for a way to apologize, thinking some sweet words would undo the damage. She had no idea that I'd already made up my mind. By the time she woke up in the morning, things would already be in motion. The next day, I acted as if nothing had happened. I woke up early, showered, and left the house before Kate even stirred in bed. I'd seen them together on the camera feed. Him sneaking out just before dawn, slipping into his car like a coward. If I'd been less restrained, I might have been waiting for him outside. But no, I wasn't going to waste my energy on him. Not yet, anyway. At work, I was all business, but my mind was elsewhere. I spent my lunch break at the station, scrolling through the surveillance footage on my phone. Every angle, every touch, every whisper was captured. They'd been seeing each other for months, it seemed, and I hadn't noticed a damn thing. It made me sick, but it also hardened my resolve. "Hey, John, you good?" My partner, Mike, looked at me from across the desk, frowning. "You've been quiet today." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just a rough night. Didn't get much sleep." He shrugged, not prying any further, which was a relief. Mike was a good guy, but he didn't need to know what was going on. No one did. The last thing I wanted was for word to get out before I was ready. I needed everything in place first. After work, I headed to the bank. Kate had no idea I had a separate account, one I'd been slowly filling with money over the years. It wasn't much at first, just a little here and there, but it added up. Enough to ensure that when things blew up, she wouldn't be getting a cent of it. I transferred more into it today, just to be safe, leaving her no room to take me to the cleaners when the time came. From there, I visited a lawyer. Divorce wasn't something I wanted, but after what I'd seen, it was inevitable. I wasn't about to waste time trying to patch things up. Kate had made her bed, literally, and now she could lie in it, alone. The lawyer, a tough woman named Lisa, listened quietly as I explained the situation, her face giving nothing away. She'd seen this kind of thing before. "You sure you want to go straight to divorce?" she asked, her pen hovering over her notepad. "Some people go through mediation first. Try to work things out." "I'm sure," I said, my voice cold and final. "I'm done." She nodded and made some notes. "We can start the paperwork today. Given the circumstances, I'd advise gathering as much evidence as possible, anything that can protect your assets. Do you have proof of the affair?" "I do," I replied, pulling out my phone and showing her the videos. She watched them for a moment, her expression as impassive as ever. "This is good," she said. "We'll make sure she doesn't get a dime more than she deserves." As I left her office, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. This was the first step, the first piece of the plan falling into place. But I wasn't done yet. That night, I acted like everything was normal. Kate greeted me with a kiss when I walked through the door, her smile warm and sweet, as if nothing had changed. But I could see it now, the subtle guilt in her eyes, the way she fidgeted when I asked about her day. She didn't know that I knew, and that gave me power. Power I intended to use. Long day? She asked, handing me a beer as I sat down at the kitchen table. Yeah, I replied, taking a sip. How about you? Busy. Just the usual stuff. She shrugged, avoiding my gaze. I thought maybe we could spend some time together this weekend. Just us. Maybe take a little trip? A trip? I almost laughed. How ironic, considering the tickets I'd left on the table this morning. I wondered if she'd even noticed them. Yeah, maybe, I said noncommittally. We'll see. I kept the conversation light, talking about work and other mundane things, all the while watching her closely. She had no idea that I was already moving pieces around the board, setting her up for the fall that was coming. But I wasn't ready to confront her yet. I needed to bide my time. Over the next few days, I gathered more evidence, using the cameras and tracking her every move. The affair was ongoing, and she was getting bolder. Meeting him during the day, exchanging flirty texts, even talking about leaving me. But what she didn't know was that I was always 2 steps ahead. I hired a private investigator, someone I trusted to dig up every bit of dirt on her lover. His name was Ryan, a local contractor. A nobody. But I wanted to know everything about him. Where he lived, where he worked, who he was connected to. If he thought he could waltz into my life and take what was mine, he had another thing coming. The PI worked fast, and within a week, I had a complete dossier on Ryan. He was married, which didn't surprise me, but what did surprise me was how much dirt there was on him. Financial troubles, unpaid taxes, a few run-ins with the law. This guy was a walking disaster, and Kate had thrown everything away for him. The more I learned, the more focused I became. This wasn't just about hurting Kate anymore. It was about dismantling Ryan's life, piece by piece. I wanted him to feel the same helplessness, the same betrayal that I did. And I had just the plan to make that happen. The day finally came when I was ready to put everything into motion. I sat at the kitchen table, just like I had that first night, my phone in hand, watching the live feed from the cameras. Kate had left to meet Ryan again, and this time, I was going to confront her. But not in person. No, I had something much better in mind. I watched as they met at a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, laughing and kissing like teenagers. My blood boiled, but I kept calm. I needed to stay focused. Once they were inside, I hit record on the camera feed, capturing every moment, every kiss, every touch, every betrayal. Then, I made a call. Hello, Ryan's wife? I said when a woman's voice answered the phone. I think you might want to see something. The fallout was immediate. Ryan's wife left him the same day, taking the kids and most of their savings with her. He was ruined, not just financially but personally. Word spread quickly about his affair, and he lost several major contracts in the weeks that followed. I heard he had to move out of town, leaving behind the mess he'd made. As for Kate, I waited until everything was crumbling around her before I dropped the final bombshell. One night, after another secret rendezvous with Ryan, I sat her down at the kitchen table, the same place where I'd sat in silence, planning my revenge. Kate, I said, sliding the divorce papers across the table. We're done. Her eyes widened in shock. What? John, what are you talking about? I know about you and Ryan, I said, my voice calm, almost cold. I've known for months. I have the videos, the texts, everything. Her face went pale. John, Don't. I cut her off. Don't even try to explain. It's over. I've already filed for divorce, and trust me, you're not getting a penny more than you deserve. And as for Ryan, he's already gone. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt nothing. You threw away everything for him, I continued. And now, you have nothing. She sobbed, begging for forgiveness, but it was too late. I stood up, leaving her at the table, broken and alone. I had already won. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of court filings and settlements, but in the end, I came out on top. Kate left town, humiliated and with nothing to her name. Ryan was a shadow of his former self, a man destroyed by his own greed and arrogance. And me? I was free. The house felt quieter now, emptier, but I didn't mind. It was peaceful. I had my life back, and though it wasn't the life I'd planned, it was mine. I'd made sure of that. Revenge, they say, is a dish best served cold. And this time, I'd savored every bite. The weeks after Kate left were eerily quiet. It was strange, living in the same house where so much had crumbled, where every corner reminded me of a life that was now nothing but a memory. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, though. In fact, it was the opposite, peaceful, as if the air had finally cleared. I didn't miss the tension, the lies, or the weight of wondering what was going on behind my back. Now, I could breathe. I spent a lot of time reflecting on how everything had gone down. There were moments when the anger still flared, but mostly, I was satisfied. I'd done what I needed to do. I'd protected myself, and I'd made sure neither Kate nor Ryan would walk away unscathed. But as the dust settled, I realized that revenge, as sweet as it had been, wasn't the only thing that mattered. I needed to rebuild my life. At first, that thought seemed overwhelming. I had been married to Kate for over a decade, and even though things had been deteriorating for a while, the routine of my life had been built around us. Now, that structure was gone. I had to figure out what was next, not just in terms of my career or my finances, but who I was without her. The first step in my new life was figuring out what to do with the house. It had always felt like our home, every room tied to a memory with Kate. I couldn't live in the shadow of what had happened there. The betrayal, the lies, they were embedded in the walls. I needed a fresh start, so I made the decision to sell it. It wasn't an easy choice, but I knew it was the right one. The process of selling was quicker than I expected. The real estate market was hot, and despite everything, the house was in good shape. I found a realtor, packed up my things, and in a few short months, the house was sold. The new owners seemed nice, a young couple, full of excitement about starting their life together. I wondered if they'd ever experienced the same kind of betrayal that had ripped mine apart, but I quickly shook off that thought. Their life was theirs to live, and mine was no longer tied to that place. Once the house was sold, I moved into a modest apartment downtown. It wasn't much, but it was enough for me. I liked the simplicity of it. No yard to take care of, no rooms filled with reminders of what I'd lost. It was clean, new, and most importantly, it was mine. Work became my anchor during those early months. I threw myself into my cases, focusing on catching criminals and solving problems for people who still had a chance to keep their lives intact. I started taking on more complex investigations, spending longer hours at the station. It was easier to drown myself in work than to face the emptiness I sometimes felt when I was alone. But despite the long hours, I couldn't avoid the inevitable. One night, I came home after an exhausting shift, kicked off my boots, and sat down on the couch. The quiet of the apartment settled around me, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't distract myself with a case file or a beer. I just sat there, letting the silence wash over me. That's when it hit me. The emptiness wasn't just about losing Kate. It was about losing a part of myself. For years, I had defined myself by my work and my marriage, but now that both of those had changed, I wasn't sure who I was anymore. I had spent so much energy plotting my revenge, making sure she felt the pain I did, that I hadn't thought about what came after. I had no plan beyond making sure Kate and Ryan paid for what they'd done. Now that they were out of my life, I was left with myself, and I didn't know what to do with that. The next few months were a slow journey of figuring out who I was on my own. I started working out more, taking time to care for my body in a way I hadn't in years. I hadn't realized how much I had neglected myself between the long shifts, the constant stress of the job, and the emotional toll of my marriage. The gym became my sanctuary, a place where I could clear my mind and focus on something tangible. Every weight lifted, every mile run, felt like a step towards reclaiming myself. 3. I also started going out more, reconnecting with friends I hadn't seen in a while. Mike, my partner at the station, dragged me to a bar one Friday night, insisting that I needed to get back out there. I wasn't ready for dating yet, but it felt good to laugh, to have a beer with people who didn't know the details of my private life. They treated me like John, the cop, not John, the guy whose wife had cheated on him. It was a small but welcome shift. It wasn't long before I realized that I actually liked being on my own. I had always thought of myself as someone who needed to be part of a relationship, but now, I was learning that I was okay being single. There was something liberating about it. Making my own decisions, living on my own terms. I could come and go as I pleased, without checking in with anyone. And for the first time in years, I felt a sense of control over my life. One evening, as I was packing up to leave the station, Mike leaned over the desk and smirked. "You've been happier lately, man. What's going on? You seeing someone?" I laughed, shaking my head. "Nah, just getting used to the single life, I guess." Mike raised an eyebrow. "You've been single for a while now. Don't you think it's time to get back out there?" I shrugged. "I don't know. I'm not in a rush. I've got other things to figure out." "Fair enough," he said, leaning back in his chair. "But don't wait too long. You're a good guy, John. You deserve to be happy." His words stuck with me as I left the station. Did I deserve to be happy? For so long, I had been consumed by anger, by the need for revenge, that I hadn't thought much about happiness. It seemed like such a foreign concept now. But as I walked down the street that night, I realized that maybe, just maybe, happiness wasn't as far off as I thought. A few months later, I ran into an old friend, Sarah. She was someone I had known back in high school, and we had kept in touch over the years, though not as often recently. She was a lawyer now, working for a firm in the city, and we ran into each other at a coffee shop one morning. "John, it's been forever," she said, smiling as she hugged me. "Yeah, it has," I replied, genuinely happy to see her. "How've you been?" We spent the next half hour catching up over coffee. It felt easy, natural, like no time had passed. Sarah had always been smart, funny, and kind, and talking to her was a welcome distraction from everything that had been going on in my life. Before we parted ways, she suggested we grab dinner sometime, and I agreed, not thinking much of it at the time. But that dinner turned into another, and then another. Before I knew it, I found myself looking forward to seeing her, to hearing about her day, to laughing at her stories. It wasn't romantic, at least, not at first, but it was comforting. She was a reminder that not all relationships were doomed to fail, that not everyone would betray you the way Kate had. One night, after a particularly long dinner, Sarah and I were walking through the city, the streets quiet and the sky clear. She stopped suddenly, turning to face me, her expression soft but serious. "John, are you ever going to tell me what really happened with Kate?" I froze for a moment, not sure how to respond. I hadn't told Sarah the details, and she hadn't pushed, but now, standing there under the streetlights, I realized I trusted her. She wasn't asking to judge me or to pry. She just wanted to understand. So, I told her. I told her everything, from the moment I found out about the affair to the revenge I had planned so carefully. I expected her to be shocked, maybe even disapproving, but she just listened quietly, her eyes never leaving mine. When I finished, she reached out and touched my arm. "John, I'm so sorry you went through that." "Yeah," I said, my voice low. "It was rough." She nodded. "But you're here. You survived it. And you've come out stronger." For the first time, I believed her. As the months passed, Sarah and I grew closer. What had started as a friendship slowly evolved into something more, though neither of us rushed it. We took our time, letting things unfold naturally. I was cautious, hesitant to dive back into a relationship after what had happened with Kate, but with Sarah, it felt different. There was no pressure, no expectation, just two people enjoying each other's company. One night, after dinner at my apartment, we were sitting on the couch, talking about everything and nothing. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized that I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't afraid of being hurt or of being vulnerable. Sarah had shown me that not all love was built on lies, that trust wasn't just a fantasy. "I think I'm ready," I said quietly, almost to myself. Sarah looked at me, her brow furrowed. "Ready for what?" "For this," I replied, gesturing between us. "For us." A slow smile spread across her face, and she leaned in, kissing me softly. It wasn't a passionate, desperate kiss. It was gentle, filled with understanding and patience. And in that moment, I knew that this was what I had been waiting for. Not revenge, not anger, but this, something real, something built on trust and mutual respect. Life didn't suddenly become perfect after that. There were still tough days, moments when the memories of Kate's betrayal resurfaced, gnawing at the edges of my mind. But they were fewer and farther between, and with Sarah by my side, I found it easier to let go. I learned that healing wasn't about forgetting what had happened. It was about accepting it, learning from it, and moving forward. And that's exactly what I did. I never saw Kate or Ryan again, and I was fine with that. I didn't need to see their downfall to feel validated. The revenge I had taken was enough, but it wasn't the foundation of my future. My happiness wasn't tied to their misery. As Sarah and I built a life together, I realized that I had found something much more valuable than revenge. I had found peace. Peace in knowing that I had taken control of my life. Peace in knowing that I could trust again. And peace in knowing that I had emerged from the storm stronger than I had ever been. And that, in the end, was the sweetest victory of all. After that night with Sarah, something shifted inside me. It wasn't just that I had let go of the anger, or that I had opened myself up to love again. It was more than that. I had finally started to reclaim my life. Piece by piece, I was putting things back together, but in a way that felt authentic, like I was building something new rather than trying to patch up the ruins of the past. But even as things were improving, I couldn't shake the sense that there were still loose ends. That revenge, no matter how satisfying, had left something unresolved. I had never confronted Kate, not properly. The divorce had been handled quietly, through lawyers and paperwork, and we had never had the conversation. The one where she explained herself, where I told her how much she had hurt me, where we laid everything out on the table. I hadn't wanted it at the time, but now I wondered if that was why I still had moments of doubt. Maybe part of moving forward wasn't just about finding peace with Sarah or rebuilding my life. Maybe it was about facing the past head-on. I debated it for weeks. What good would it do to drag it all up again? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I needed closure. Real closure. Not just the silent kind that comes from walking away, but the kind that comes from confronting the person who betrayed you and understanding why. It took me another month before I found the courage to reach out. I texted Kate, keeping it short and to the point. "John, we need to talk. Just once. No lawyers. No fights. Just talk." Her response came almost immediately. "Kate, I didn't think you'd ever want to see me again. Are you sure?" I hesitated before typing back. "John, I'm sure. We can meet in public if that's easier." Kate, "Okay. Tomorrow?" And just like that, it was happening. I didn't know what I expected. An apology? An explanation? Part of me didn't even care about the why anymore. I just wanted to look her in the eye, to tell her how much she had broken me, and to finally put an end to it. We met at a small cafe downtown, the kind of neutral, quiet place where serious conversations happen. I arrived early, needing the time to calm my nerves. I hadn't seen her since the day I handed her the divorce papers, and even though I was with Sarah now, the thought of facing Kate again made my stomach twist. This wasn't about rekindling anything. It was about closing a chapter. But seeing her again, after everything, brought up emotions I wasn't ready for. When Kate walked in, she looked different. Older, maybe, or maybe just worn down by the consequences of her choices. She spotted me immediately and walked over, her eyes wary, as if she didn't quite know how to act around me anymore. The same woman who had once shared my bed, my life, now felt like a stranger. "John," she said, sitting down across from me. "You look good." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak just yet. I wasn't here for pleasantries. I wasn't here for small talk. She sighed, looking down at the table. I guess we both knew this day would come eventually. I studied her face, trying to see if there was any regret there. Maybe there was. Maybe there wasn't. But it didn't matter. I was here for one thing, and I wasn't going to dance around it. "Why did you do it, Kate?" I asked, my voice surprisingly calm. "Why Ryan? Why any of it?" Her eyes flicked up to mine, and for a moment, I saw the Kate I used to know. The one who was quick to laugh, quick to love, and who had been my whole world. But then she blinked, and the walls came up again. "I don't know, John," she said, shaking her head. "I've thought about it a lot, and I don't have a good answer. I think I was just lost. You were working all the time, and I felt like we were drifting apart. I know that's not an excuse, but it's the truth." I clenched my fists under the table, fighting the urge to let the anger back in. "So, you were lost, and you decided sleeping with someone else was the solution?" Her face tightened. It wasn't that simple. I'm not proud of what I did. But you were gone, John. You were out there every night, and I don't know, lonely. And Ryan, he was there. You could have talked to me, I said, my voice rising slightly. You could have told me you felt like we were drifting. But instead, you lied. You cheated. You threw away everything we had without even giving me a chance. She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. I know I should have. But it felt like we were too far gone, like you wouldn't have even cared. You were so wrapped up in your job and saving everyone else that I didn't think there was any room left for me. I leaned forward, my voice low and hard. There was always room for you, Kate. I was doing that job for us, for our future. I was trying to make sure we had a life. I know, she whispered, wiping away a tear. And I didn't see it that way. I screwed up, John. I know that. And I've paid for it. I lost you. I lost everything. I sat back, letting her words sink in. There was no satisfaction in hearing her admit it. It didn't make me feel better. If anything, it just made me sad. Sad for what we'd lost, sad for what she'd become, sad for the years we'd wasted. I just needed to hear you say it, I said after a long pause. That you knew what you did. That you understand how much you hurt me. She nodded, her expression miserable. I do, John. I think about it every day. Silence fell between us. There was nothing left to say. The closure I had been searching for was here, sitting across from me in the form of a broken woman who had made a terrible mistake. I had imagined this moment so many times, thinking it would bring me some sense of relief, some sense of justice. But now that I was here, all I felt was exhaustion. It was over. Finally over. I hope you find peace, I said, standing up to leave. For what it's worth, I don't hate you anymore. Kate looked up at me, her eyes full of tears. I'm sorry, John. I really am. I nodded, not trusting myself to say anything else. Then, without another word, I walked out of the cafe and into the cool evening air. The weight I'd been carrying for so long, the anger, the bitterness, the pain, it lifted just a little bit. As the weeks passed, I found that the confrontation with Kate had helped more than I realized. I had needed that closure, that final conversation to truly move on. And now, I could focus on the future. I could focus on Sarah. Things with Sarah were steady, calm. We didn't rush into anything, didn't try to force the relationship into something it wasn't. But slowly, we began to build something meaningful. It wasn't the whirlwind romance that I had experienced with Kate all those years ago, but that was a good thing. This was something real, something grounded in trust and respect. One night, as we sat on my apartment balcony, looking out over the city, Sarah reached for my hand. You've been different lately, she said softly. Different how? I asked, genuinely curious. Lighter, she replied, squeezing my hand. Like a weight's been lifted. I smiled, thinking about how far I'd come. Yeah, I guess it has. She turned to face me, her expression serious. John, I don't want to push you, but do you see a future with us? Because I do. And I need to know if you're on the same page. I looked into her eyes, feeling the truth rise to the surface. Yes, Sarah, I do. I see a future with us. She smiled, and in that moment, I realized something. All the pain, all the anger, all the revenge. It had been necessary for me to get to this point. To let go. To open myself up to the possibility of happiness again. And with Sarah, I had found it. Months passed, and life slowly fell into a new rhythm. The scars of the past were still there, but they didn't hurt like they used to. I had found peace, and more than that, I had found hope. I stayed in touch with Mike, who was thrilled to see me happy again. The guys at the station joked about how I'd finally found a woman who could put up with me, and I laughed along with them. It was good to be part of something normal again, to have people in my life who cared about me for who I was, not what I had been through. As for Sarah, she became more than just my partner. She became my confidant, my best friend, and eventually, something more. We moved in together a year after we started dating, and from there, things just fell into place. Life wasn't perfect, but it was good, better than I had imagined it could be after everything that had happened. One night, years later, as we sat on the couch, Sarah leaned against me, her head resting on my shoulder. The room was quiet, the only sound the soft hum of the city outside. "I'm proud of you, you know," she said quietly. "For what?" I asked, glancing down at her. "For letting go," she replied, her voice soft but full of meaning. "For finding peace." I smiled, realizing that she was right. I had let go. I had found peace. And more than that, I had found love again. In the end, it wasn't revenge that had given me closure. It was forgiveness, of Kate, of myself, of the past. And now, as I sat there with Sarah, I knew that I had finally found the happiness I deserved. Life, it seemed, had a way of surprising you when you least expected it. And that's how it ended. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment your thoughts below. Tell us, what would you have done in their shoes?